In the previous episode of Van Designs, we were struggling. The battens were falling off the walls, the roof was leaking, we were battling the elements, and I was beginning to wonder if we had made a huge mistake taking on such a big project. But by the end of the video, we had not only fixed our mistakes, we'd taken the van on its first ever camping trip. And honestly, it felt amazing sleeping in a bed that we'd made ourselves. So it's now time to use that momentum from last week and complete what I think is a pretty major milestone in this build, and that is putting in the walls.
You're probably wondering, what the heck are those wires and how are they going to fit through the walls? Well friend, let me show you. These are the wires for our control panel, which includes the light, pump and inverter switches, the battery monitor and the 240 volt power plug. We're creating holes in the wall that fit each of these elements. The layout of the elements sent me into a bit of a spiral, but this is ultimately what we ended up with. If I were to do it again, I'd put the battery monitor up higher, because when you're looking at it from a high angle, it is a bit hard to read. But anyway, Jack used the jigsaw to cut out the control panel holes, and this is what it looks like done. We're using 12mm plywood for all the walls, as it's flexible enough to bend with the curves of the walls, but not too thin that it will vibrate when we're driving. To prep the plywood, we sanded it down with sandpaper and then applied a thin coat of Danish wood oil to each side. This protects the wood from absorbing moisture and warping down the line. We'll leave it to dry overnight so we can install tomorrow. Like everything on this build, this took so much longer than I thought it would, and it was dark by the time I finished. The instant it got dark, I got absolutely destroyed by mosquitoes, but I'm not complaining at this point because I'm riding high on the success of the weekend.
Today is a very exciting day because we are putting the walls on the van.
But before we can do that, we need to deal with these wires. We have wires coming from the fuse box to the other side of the van, so we can have a USB charger and reading light on each side. These wires are a mess because we just put them in place to measure the length, but they need to be neatly tucked away so we can put the walls on and eventually the roof without them getting in the way. To do this, I'm using duct tape to hold the wires together and zip ties to secure the wires in place. If you recall, last week the van looked like this, with only battens and insulation on the sides of the van. But now it's wall time. The final step in prepping the walls is drilling holes in the plywood to align with the battens behind that we installed last week. Then, after putting the walls in place, installation is a reasonably simple process of threading the wires through the holes. Here Jack is threading the wires for the reading light and USB, and then drilling the walls into the battens. As a final act for the day, Jack wired up the electronics for the control panel, and we'd run out of daylight, so he stuck them in place, ready to be screwed in tomorrow. And this is what it looks like when it's done. You can see the screws are aligned to the battens, and we've used this guideline to make sure that the walls are on straight. If you've seen any of my previous videos, you'll know that I struggle with what I like to call time delusion. So yes, I thought we could get the walls on in one day. That didn't happen, but today is wall day, part 2, baby. We're installing the wall in 3 parts for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the size of the plywood that we're using doesn't cover the whole height of the wall. The second reason is that the wall is curved, so even if we use the plywood long ways, we'd still have issues installing it because of the curvature. Today, we also installed the reading lamps and USB ports. These are not our first USB ports, oh no, they are actually our third. The first ones were actually for 240 volt connections rather than 12 volt. The second ones had this really obnoxious blue indicator, but these ones work really well for the van, so we landed on these. I genuinely thought that this week would be easier than last week. I was feeling so positive going into the week, but the rain turned into blistering heat and I'm genuinely not sure what's worth it at this stage. I think messing up the USB ports not once but twice tipped me over the edge a little bit. Going forwards, I'm going to try to be realistic instead of optimistic, and hopefully having realistic expectations will tap this emotional roller coaster I've been on.
is so hot. Like, so hot. It is just far too hot to work in the van today. We basically got nothing done. It was already 30 degrees by 8 a.m. and at that temperature it's just not possible for us because we only have the front yard and the sidewalk for us to work in. But yesterday was my last day of paid employment, so I'm definitely starting to feel the stress of no income. So I wanted to get at least a little task done today. I'm going to peel up the masking tape that we used to mark the layout of the kitchen on the floor and give the van a bit of a clean because it's got a bit dirty in the past couple of weeks. We have walls. I feel a bit emotional because it feels like such a milestone in the build. As long as you don't look at the roof, it actually feels like the van is a room that we can live in. In the next video, we'll be doing an entire day of van build in one video. I've seen a lot of videos of people converting vans and they make it look really easy. But this is one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. So I want to do a realistic day in the life of a van conversion with no experience to show the struggles, but also the wins of converting a van yourself. Okay, that's the end of the video. Thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.